All right there, everyone. French President Macron backs down, but it's too little too late. Why the new French Revolution is just beginning. That's what we'll be talking about on today's video. A huge welcome to all of our first-time viewers. Thank you so much for being with us. I post 2 videos a day analyzing current events in light of awesome conservative trends. So let me encourage you to smack that bell and subscribe button. We are on our way to 100,000 subscribers, and it'd be an absolute privilege to have you as one of them. All right, so the Yellow Jackets are winning. They're winning. It's just been announced that Macron has conceded that he has completely underestimated these massive protests that are now numbering into the hundreds of thousands throughout France. I mean, first responders who were sent to deal with the protests have actually now begun to join in and stand arm in arm with the demonstrators. That's how bad it's gotten for Macron. He has announced a 6-month suspension of planned fuel taxes, which appears to have been the impetus for the demonstrations, but they've turned into nothing less than the makings of a new French revolution sweeping the nation. So Emmanuel Macron, the globalist hope of Europe, the EU's savior and defender, is now eating humble pie and is openly appearing contrite and apologetic, admitting he's underestimated the distress of ordinary people struggling to make ends meet. He's now promising that he's going to be listening more. And, he even promised that he would involve grassroots activists in finding practical solutions to move to a low-carbon economy without ruining poor households. Now, few believe that this latest motion towards contrition is going to be enough to quell the momentum of what some estimate to be upwards of 280,000 people coming out and saying they want nothing more to do with Macron and his project of globalization. And analysts are recognizing that the sentiments behind these protests, which the vast majority of the French population support, by the way, they're recognizing that these populist sentiments resemble the very anti-establishment fever that drove Britain's vote to leave the European Union, swept Donald Trump into the White House, and hoisted populist parties into government in Italy. And most recently, of course, the nationalist populist Vox Party into Spain's parliament just last weekend. Marine Le Pen of National Rally is, of course, a huge supporter for the Yellow Jacket protest. I'm sure many of you know that a recent national poll was just published last month, showed that Le Pen's National Rally is currently in first place, beating Macron's En Marche party in terms of which party voters intend to vote for the upcoming European elections in May. So obviously, Marine Le Pen smells blood here and sees this as perhaps the beginning of the end for Macron and centrist globalist politics in France. Now, what's happening here with the Yellow Jacket revolt is simply confirming what many scholars have been observing would eventually and inevitably happen in France. A number of scholars have observed that France may in fact be ready to utterly explode. One in particular talks about the growth of what he calls peripheral France, which is made up of populations that have been driven from urban centers throughout the nation, largely because of what's called deindustrialization and gentrification. We have to remember that globalism creates what's called a global division of labor, where manufacturing and industry factory jobs are just shipped out to third world nations, while capital and finance are relocated to urban centers, creating a gentrification that increases living costs in urban areas. And this process has left rural populations disenfranchised from viable living conditions in urban areas and highly unemployed in rural areas. And that's a lot of what's going on here. You have French citizens who don't have the money to live in Paris, but who can't work in their rural areas because of the high unemployment that came about as a result of this global division of labor. And that's the problem of deindustrialization and gentrification. And so one scholar in particular is pointing to the growth of what he calls peripheral France, which is made up of people who can't live in urban centers, but who can't necessarily find jobs in rural areas. So they more and more feel like they've been completely shut out from the national conversation and decision making. And to make matters even worse, between the years of 2004 and 2013, France spent 40 billion euros to refurbish and rebuild mainly ethnic minority housing centers throughout their cities, but they didn't even remotely spend anything like that to similarly depressed areas inhabited by native French citizens. Yet, on top of all this, the fact that youth unemployment is near 25% in France, is it any wonder, like we talked about in our other video the other day, is it any wonder why so many French believe that their globalist government couldn't give a rip about them? I mentioned the other day some recent polling throughout Europe that asked voters whether they thought traditional parties and politicians don't care about people like me. That was the statement that the poll required them to respond to. Traditional parties and politicians don't care about people like me. Would you like to guess which nation had the highest percentage of voters agreeing with that statement that traditional parties and politicians don't listen to them, don't give a rip about them, don't care about them? As we talked about the other day, the nation with the highest percentage of voters who agreed with that statement was none other than France. 70% of voters in France responded affirmatively to the statement that their politicians don't care about them or their concerns. Now, I don't know how many of you recall Macron's admission several months back that if they were given a Brexit-like referendum, France would indeed vote to leave the EU. Do you remember that? Macron was asked in an interview what he thought about the Brexit. And Macron admitted, in effect, that he understood why so many wanted to leave, that globalization's not for everybody. He noted that the kind of economy that globalization fabricates simply does not benefit everyone. He knows that globalization involves a global division of labor that relocates manufacturing to the global south. He knows that globalization relocates finance and ownership of capital around the bankers and corporate executives among the urban elite in the West. He knows that there's been a mass exodus of industrial and manufacturing jobs from the United States and Western Europe into these so-called third world or global south nations such as Mexico, China. He knows all of that. The problem, of course, is he doesn't care. He's a committed globalist. And for Macron and Merkel and Blair and Brussels, globalization is the inevitable wave of the future. There's simply no stopping it. And so we have to reconfigure our societies around it, regardless of the damage it does, particularly to our rural populations. Nevertheless, Macron recognized that if France were to have the same referendum as Brexit, and he was asked, would we see the same result? He admitted, yeah, we would. France would vote for a Frexit. And so all this is to say that I frankly don't expect much to come out of Macron's backing down. He's already signaled that backing down on taxes means that they're going to have to cut social services. Oh, the French are going to love that. And he has no intention of backing down on his modernization agenda for France, which of course entails reconfiguring the nation around globalist norms and expectations. So in many respects, I think these protests are just the tip of the iceberg. France really is ready to blow. It does appear that we are witnessing the beginnings of a new French Revolution. As always, please like, comment, and subscribe. Click on our Patreon link below. Become a monthly supporter of this channel. As you know, we are periodically demonetized by YouTube, and we can really use your help so we can continue to analyze current events in light of awesome conservative trends so that you can personally and professionally flourish. God bless.